Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the October Stamp Along. My name is Laurie Meyer, and I am super excited to be part of the event today. And I am going to show you how to make a Slimline slider card. It is pretty straightforward. I'm going to use the items that I have shown here, and I'll be going through these in detail. But not a lot of pieces that you're going to need to actually make the card. And this is what the card looks like. It is a slimline card that has a gatefold, and it also has a slider. So this actually slides up and down and can be taken off. And then the card opens up, as you can see, with a gatefold. I'm not going to put this slider back on just now, but I will show you how to do that and how to put it back on. And the beauty of these slimline cards, as I'm sure you know, is they fit perfectly into a business size envelope, which is what this is. It's an A10 envelope. And actually this is an envelope that I had left over from many years ago when I was doing job hunting. So it came with a package of resume paper and the envelopes that go with that resume paper. So it's super, super nice to have something like that. And as far as postage, I have found that I can mail these with a regular stamp, and then I bought these additional ounce stamps. They're 15 cents. So one regular postage stamp and then an additional ounce stamp will get this card in the mail without a problem. But I'm sure we need to just get into making the card. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to need is a piece of Whisper White thick cardstock. At least that's what I recommend. And the first thing to do is to take this standard piece, which we all know is 11 inches by 8.5 inches, and cut it down a little bit. I am going to cut 3 inches off this piece, and I'm going to end up with 2 sheets of paper, one that is going to be 3 inches by 8.5, and the other is going to be 8 inches by 8.5. The 8 inches by 8.5 is going to be my card base. This is what I'm going to use to create that gatefold. And the way to do that is to orient your paper in your cutter/trimmer so that the 8-inch line is horizontal, that it's going on the actual trimmer itself. Line up the edge. You can see it's down at 8.5 if I move this down a little bit, but this is my 8-inch line. And you're going to score at 2 inches. Then you're literally going to turn that piece of paper around and score at 2 inches. And this is going to create the base for the card. It is a gatefold, but there's one very unique thing about this gatefold. Now let me show you. If I bring the card back in, the one that I showed you, you're going to see that there's a gap. It's not a perfectly aligned gatefold. It's not, those ends are not touching each other. You want to have a little bit of a gap because you are going to make that slider, and the slider is going to need to move. So if you were to bring the gatefold so that the edges actually touched, your slider would not be able to move, and that's really not where we're going. And it's the strangest thing. I have found that if I score at 2 inches and then turn the paper and score at 2 inches on the other side, I get a gap. And that is a perfect measurement to actually make this card. So you do need a gap. Do not throw away the extra piece of paper that you have. This is my extra 8.5 by 3. I'm actually going to use this piece to make the white that is going to go on both sides of that gatefold. So I'm using up an entire piece of 8.5 by 11. And what I want to do with that is I'm going to bring my cutter back in. I need to make that a little bit shorter because as you can see, if I bring the card back in, that white piece is a little shorter than 8.5. It's actually 8 inches long. So I'm going to take the extra 3 by 8.5. I'm going to take off 1/2 inch to get it down to 8 inches. And then I'm simply going to cut this in half. So at 1.5, I am going to cut that piece that was 3 inches wide. And now I have my 2 panels that are going to go on the side. So I started with a piece that was 8.5 inches by 11, a standard piece of cardstock. And what I've ended up with is my base and the pieces that are going to go onto the side. The other pieces that I need for the front of the card, I need some framing that will go on each of the gatefolds. The framing that I chose is pumpkin pie cardstock, and that is actually cut into 8 3/8, so 8 3/8 long by 1 7/8 wide. And what that's going to do is you're going to have a nice border right around that pumpkin pie. You're going to be able to see that thick whisper white. It's going to have a nice border around it. Well, I kind of cheated. So I've already cut my pumpkin pie pieces. And as you can see, when I put them together on top of the card, I just have a nice little frame on both sides. I am going to go ahead and glue these down. I'm going to glue the pumpkin pie pieces down. I am going to hold off on putting the white down because I'm going to do a little bit of embellishment on that part of the card. And what I chose to use are the beautiful stitched leaf dies that are part of the Love of Leaves bundle. And I'll just bring this back in. They are perfect for this card. They add a lot of character without really going into a tremendous amount of detail. And I just want to get this as centered as I can. And I'll come back with my other piece to go on the gatefold. The other thing that I've used, as you can see, to add some color and interest to the card is the Plaid Tidings Designer Series paper. I am in love with it. I really love the different colors. The patterns are beautiful. There's so many different plaids that are included. And darn it, it's one of the DSP collections that is on sale this month. So I am sure that I will end up with a couple more of those in my collection. The next thing to do is to decorate the sides of the card. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to decorate the white panels before we glue them down. The reason for this is when I made the original card that I showed you, I tried, I don't know if I succeeded or not, but I tried to make the design the same on both sides. And the only way that I found that I could do that was if I literally had the pieces together and glued them so that I could try to mimic each one side by side. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to take one of the pieces of my white panel, and I have pre-cut 4 of the leaves that I'm going to end up putting on top. I purposely chose colors that would go with the plaid that I am going to put on the slider. And those colors are Cajun Craze, cherry cobbler, bumblebee, and then of course added a little bling. This is from the brushed metallics. What I have found, and I'm sure you guys have too, is if you have used the brushed metallic cardstock, if you put glue on the pieces and you're layering them together, in other words, if you're putting glue on the brushed metallic and then you try to glue another brushed metallic to that original, the glue doesn't work so good for me. It's one of those where I tend to have it squish through the little holes that are on here on the actual leaves. It makes a little bit of a mess. So I have decided that I'm going to take a shortcut, be a little smart, and I am just using some glue dots on the back of these leaves. And I may come back later and put a little bit of liquid glue underneath. I'm not sure yet. We'll see what happens. But I am just putting these together and kind of randomly adding the leaves on here. And I'm trying to tuck the stems so I don't see. The only stem that I'm going to see is the one that's in this bumblebee, which is going to be on the top. So I've got one of my sides done. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this as a model. And I'm going to bring in my other piece of white, because if I'm trying to mimic what I did, the best way to do that is to have them side by side. And then I can try my best to get them to look the same. Don't know if it will be exact, but we shall see. So I am just copying the best that I can. I'm not going to say bad things about myself if they don't end up being exactly the same. It will have the effect. And I'm just going to put these down and hope for the best, but try to get it about the same. The brushed metallics, if you have played around with them, are absolutely stunning. And the different metallics, the bronze or the golds and the coppers, are really, really pretty. And they work together so well. You can probably tell that if you look at the two brushed metallic leaves that I cut out, I purposely used two different metals because I wanted a little bit of a difference to show. So that was just me making a choice to use different colors. All right, so I have my two pieces. They're not exactly the same, but you know what? That's okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back my base and I am going to adhere these down. And you have choices here. You can put the leaves so that they're in the upper right hand corner, bottom left hand corner, whatever makes you happy. You can turn them around. I don't know why, but I tend to like to have the design in the upper right hand corner. And I'm going to bring back my liquid glue. I think I should buy stock in whatever company makes Tombow because I go through this like crazy. But it is definitely my go-to adhesive. What I found is when you put these panels on, if you open up your base, it's just a little bit easier to get a nice view of what you're doing. And then you can turn this around and you can put the other side on. And then we're going to get to the really cool part. This is where you're going to feel like an engineer when we put the slider together. And I probably should tell you a little backstory about this card. I've been holding, just like I'm sure many of you have, virtual card club meetings. I have a group that has met now for somewhere around 8 years or so. And honestly, we've turned into more of a group of friends than stampers. And you can see there we've got the 2 panels that are on. I'll tell you more of the story in a minute while we're building the slider. So let's just kind of compare. Finished card in my right hand, card we're working on in my left hand. The piece that we need to complete now is the slider. And this is just plain old fun. It is built using a bunch of squares that I cut from a square die. The die is about 3 1/4 inches. Doesn't really matter what size it is. In fact, it doesn't matter what shape it is, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. I cut one out of pumpkin pie because I wanted this to correspond with the sides of the card. And you can see I already prepped this. I used the Hope Changes Everything from the Love of Leaves stamp set, and I stamped that at the bottom of my die cut. I used Cajun Craze as the ink. Love that color, and it works really well. You're also going to need 3 more squares, and they need, in this case, squares, because I'm using a square. They need to be the same size. Now, just bear with me for a minute. This will make sense. One of them is cut with plain old Whisper White. I didn't use thick. You can use thick. It doesn't matter. Exact same size. Then, believe it or not, we're going to use 2 pieces of copier paper, and they are going to be the exact same size, that 3 1/4. These 2 pieces of copier paper are scored in the middle, and they're scored in the middle at 1 5/8. You probably think I've lost my mind, but let me show you where we're going. This reminds me of one of those X-Fighters or whatever it was. I'm showing my ignorance, but I do like Star Wars. And I think there were X-Fighter somethings that the Empire had. You know, so just picture that and all the fights that Luke Skywalker got in. But we're going to make an X. And I don't know how well you can see this, but the copier paper is going to get folded. You can kind of see it right here. And that's going to make our slider. This is the slider. This is the mechanism that really makes this card. Let me show you. I am going to start with the piece of Whisper White. And I'm building this bottoms up. That's the bottom. I'm going to build it from the bottom. I'm going to take one of my pieces of copier paper, and where I scored that, I am just going to fold it right in the middle. So now I have a piece of copier paper that looks like that. I need to do the same with the other one. So I'm just going to fold that down. And honestly, you really don't have to score it. You can eyeball this without a problem. Let's talk about where we're going with this, and then I'm going to do it. I am going to glue these 2 down so that they are like this on the paper. And where I have my thumbs is where the card is going, or where the slider is going to move on the card. So the way I do this, and there is no right or wrong, is I'm going to put some liquid glue on one side of that piece of copier paper that's folded. And then I am going to put that onto the piece of Whisper White cardstock. And I am just moving that so it is really nice and straight, right up against the edge. You're going to try and hide these pieces. You want to get them as close to being aligned as you can. So right now, there's one of my pieces of copier paper. And here's part of it, and then the other part is sticking up. Well, I need to do the same on the other side. So I'm going to grab this other piece of copier paper, and I'm going to put some glue on that, just on one side. And then I am going to pause, like we always do, to make sure that I'm gluing this the right way. And I want to put this glued side so that this piece opens to the right. And that means I can take where that fold is in the copier paper and just literally butt it up against the one that I've already put on my piece of Whisper White. And now I have this X-wing looking thing. That's what I've got. All right, well, the last thing I need to do to finish the slider, let's just look. We have our bottom piece. We have the two pieces that we put on the copier paper. Now we need to put the top on. And for that, I'm going to use the piece that I pre-cut with the pumpkin pie. And again, I love Tombow because you can just kind of play, make a little design. No one's going to know. Now, again, pause. Think about what is the orientation. I want the slider to go this way, which means if I've put a sentiment on this piece, I want to make sure that sentiment is going to slide the right way. And then I am simply going to stack that piece right on top. And now I have the coolest slider ever invented. So continue with my story because the rest of this is embellishing and I'll tell you the measurements. This is not cooperating with me. There we go. So here's your slider. And as it dries, those pieces will stick a little bit more. Okay, story in a second. This is the piece of designer series paper that I'm going to put on here. And the designer series paper I chose to make this 2 7/8 by 2 1/4. I'll put all the measurements in a file and I'll put them out on the Facebook page so everybody will have them. And, you know, obviously you can decorate this however you want, whatever makes you happy. But quickly, back to my story. I have been holding virtual club meetings every Sunday on Zoom. And I had already figured out for one particular club meeting what we were going to do and was getting all my final stuff prepped. And then I went to a yoga class. We're having yoga classes at the Y here outside. And one of my dear friends, who is also a demonstrator and an avid stamper, brought a card that she had made with this kind of slider. And darn it, I just had to change what I was doing. So we ended up making this kind of card instead. And it was incredibly popular. And it was, you know, pretty fast to do, as you can see. To finish the embellishments on the slider, I am going to do just what I did a couple minutes ago with some glue dots. And I am going to put some leaves on the front. And I am also mimicking the colors that I used on the side just to keep it a little consistent. But I have seen some absolutely stunning cards that have been made like this, and my friend that I just mentioned had one that she had done, and she put a huge 3D poinsettia on the front, and that was the slider, and it was absolutely gorgeous. I will give you one tip. When you're making the slider, make sure that you don't put the pieces over the edge on one side, top and bottom, because you're going to want to actually be able to maneuver that slider. So make sure that you're thinking as you're going. And let's talk about the shapes of the sliders, because you can make these any shape. They could be circles. They could be ovals. If you have any of the label dies or anything that has a fun shape that you might want to use to make the slider, you can go ahead and do that. I could have oriented the slider also as a diamond shape if I had wanted to. When you look at your die sets, you will find some that you are just going to love and be able to use to make these cards. So again, I'm just kind of putting this together quickly with my glue dots, and I may go back later and add a little bit of glue. I also found that even using the leaf dies from the stitched leaves and putting some liquid glue on them, that sometimes, maybe I was a little heavy-handed with it, I would end up with some glue that would seep through a little bit where the stitching is on the actual leaves. And if you haven't played around with the stitched leaves dies, I really strongly recommend them. They are gorgeous. They are so much fun, and the designs that they make are really, really beautiful and very, very versatile. So there, I have my slider. I have my card base, and this is where I'm going to do a little bit of praying in the background and see if I can make sure that this is going to slide on. And the first time you do this, it may be a little tricky to get everything aligned, but yay, that worked. And now you can see that that easily slides up and down. And there we have just a really, really beautiful, beautiful card. Now, one more thing before I stop talking. Let's say that you make these cards and you want to send them to different folks. What you may end up doing is open your card up. You may actually want to put a message on the inside here. That's what I would do. Well, think about it. If you're writing your message, inevitably you are going to get some ink that is going to show because you're going to be writing along, and that ink is going to show where the divider is. There is a brilliant way that you can cover where that sentiment or where your greeting would go. You can put a card within your card. This is a top folding piece that I cut to 3 3/4 by 11, and I just scored it at 5 1/2. So what I can do is I can actually adhere that piece in the middle. I can use this as my card, or the area where I'm writing my greeting. Maybe I want to stamp some more things in there. I can adhere that to the middle of the card, and then when I shut this, no one would see where my ink would be. So just a thought, something to kind of keep in mind. But that is the card, and I want to show you another design that I did with the Dove of Hope bundle. This is the exact same card in terms of measurements and process of putting together. The biggest difference between these two cards is how I decorated the panels, I guess I'll call them that. The one that we did together is with the stitched leaves dies. The one that I did here, I chose a stamp from the Dove of Hope stamp set, and I stamped it using my Stamparatus to make sure that I had everything aligned. But again, this is another design that you could use. So many possibilities, and I am looking forward to seeing everything that you guys create with this. I really think you will enjoy it, and I am happy to be able to show you how to put this together. And Slimline cards, if you haven't made them, are super addictive. I have a problem because I've made so many that I'm definitely really enjoying that design. So thank you so much for joining me this morning. I hope you've liked this card design. and I hope you make some slider cards in the slimline fashion. And also be sure to check back at around 11:15. Nadine is going to be the next Facebook Live presenter in the October Stamp-Along, and I know she has a phenomenal project, as always, to share with us. So for now, I will say thank you, and I will be watching Nadine. Looking forward to seeing you in a few. Thank you, folks, and have a wonderful, wonderful Stamp-Along.